they don't get comment to use.
Right.
I heard. Every time you press that record button,
Everybody's
it's just
just
recording.
Well, the same.
Government watching.
Government's watching.
I know.
So it doesn't matter.
Those rings. Secret is- We're seconds. You're not gonna see me.
All right, everyone, 7 o'clock, let's all rise for the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
John Leo.
Here.
Matt O'Gara.
Here.
Nancy Rondell.
Here.
Jamie Milky.
Here.
John Cups is absent, but we do have a quorum.
Passed. Okay, this is our time for citizens' comment or anything that's not on our agenda tonight. Anyone in the audience? Anyone on the computer?
If you are on Zoom, if you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Yes. All right. Move on to the consent agenda. Any discussion on that?
Look good to me.
Yeah, looks good.
I would make a motion to approve.
One second.
Matt O'Gara.
Yes.
Jamie Milky.
Yes.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
John Leo.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Victor, you're up.
Okay. Item A is a presentation by the Parks Director, Rich Roon, on 2 DNR grant applications that we are applying for. One is a trust fund grant for Kiwanis Park renovations, and the other is a passport park grant for skate park renovations. Rachel. This.
Perfect. So the Department of Natural Resources of Michigan opens their grant cycle in February, late January, and all applications are due April 1st. So we've been working diligently on these applications, but I keep going, Victor. I'm going to speak about the trust fund and just the grants in general first. So eligibility to apply for these grants, local unit of government, you need a 25% match for each grant, and that's of total project cost. It can come from general fund, in-kind donation, cash donations. For the trust fund grant, you do need a 5-year Parks and Recreation plan that is approved by Michigan DNR. Ours was approved last week. That is official. And then for the passport grant, you need either a 5-year recreation plan or the project has to be part of your capital improvements plan. All applicants must hold at least one public meeting to receive input about the application. We have held several plus the public hearings tonight. Eligible projects are outdoor recreation projects, which include fishing, hunting, facilities, beaches, picnic areas, campgrounds, playgrounds. So they include a lot of things, you know, passive parks, active parks, leaves the door open. Grant obligations. So the land including the boundary of the project site must remain open to public outdoor recreation use. in perpetuity. The grantee must maintain the site, including facilities constructed with grant assistance. Everything, all the scope items must meet the ADA standards for accessible design. All new projects must install a plaque, and then an entrance sign identifying the park as a public recreation site. And the recreation site must be open to all users. Kiwanis, we've already had a DNR grant in the past, back in the 70s. We're already held to a lot of these. Kiwanis renovations. So the grant request would be $225,000, making the match. We have an anonymous donor with a match of $75,000, and that will bring the total grant to $300,000. Like I said, both applications are due April 1st. The trust fund is awarded in December. They're made public in January. Usually construction is about a year and a half, 2 years out. And then the scope items for the trust fund grant would be ADA accessible outdoor restrooms, an ice rink, a storage building for the ice rink tools and maintenance, and parking updates. Public input, February 21st, this was an agenda item on the Parks Board. We had a special Parks Board meeting March 13th for Vanessa Warren from OHM came in and went over all the concept designs. And then we have this March 20th public hearing and the Parks Board meeting tomorrow evening as well. In the 2022 Parks Survey, a skating rink was ranked highest on amenities wish list. Kiwanis Park, according to the 2022 survey, is one of the top 2 most visited parks within city limits. And Kiwanis surveys passed out at sledding events also took note on the importance of putting back in the ice rink that we previously had at the skate park. These are the site images next to each other. This is a concept design by OHM advisors, so it's showing the scope items. We still have a year to go over the specifics about how many parking spots we want, where exactly do we want the playground if we want it relocated, how large do we want the ice rink. Those are all things, once we have an engineer, we will dive into with more public meetings. If you want to go down a little further. So this site design has the playground in approximately the same location with an ADA walking path to each component. It has an 80 by 60 skating rink, which is a bit smaller than what we currently have. It has the loop. It's a little further north than it is now. Again, with the parking for ADA accessibility, and then the restroom would be an outdoor restroom access that would meet ADA guidelines. For the skate park, for the Passport grant, the grant request would be $66,000. The application is due April 1st, and then the match would be the general fund, which would be 25% of total project cost, which will be in the resolution. This is to landscape around the new Evergreen concrete skate park and new windows in the building. So Evergreen is scheduled to come this fall to remodel the skate park. That would not be part of the grant. It would be in the spring when we do the landscaping, picnic tables, benches, and then the skate park building qualifies because we do rentals out of it, and that's where our restrooms are as well. And then that is the site image. And again, that's a concept design. So Evergreen hasn't sent us a final design to go to the public and review. But it'd be the shade sails, which we had at Marina Park, just the poles for that, picnic tables, berms, bench seating, and some plantings. So. Any questions on the grants themselves?
What we'll do is then open each public hearing in the next agenda item, one for the skate park grant request and then one for the Kiwanis Park grant request. And that's when the public then can have their input for the grants. So we'll move on to that next. So again, as I mentioned, we need 2 separate public hearings because they're 2 separate grants for 2 separate projects. As Rachel said, we are not committed to the specifics of these plans. These are just concepts, and we have several months to rework these plans. And if we are awarded these grants, we will have to come back to council to accept the award. So this is applying for it, is not accepting it. It's just resolving that if we do accept the grant, that we will commit the funds that we have said we would commit. And so through the Kiwanis Park, that is a 25% match that a donor is willing to match on that one. And then the skate park, we already had some money put aside for new windows in our capital improvements plan. And we could easily fundraise for the other landscaping part, like the benches and picnic tables. So Mayor, I would ask that you probably open the public hearing first for the skate park.
Okay, do we have to do a motion to go on to the
Yep.
public hearing?
Yep.
I'll make a motion that we open the public hearing for the Kiwanis Park Trust Fund grant.
I'll second.
Nancy Rondell,
Yes.
Matt Bogera,
Yes.
John Leo,
Yes.
and Jamie Melky.
Yes.
Yeah. And do we have any public comment on our Kiwanis Park grant?
In favor?
Perfect. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Will the disc golf course be preserved at Kiwanis Park?
It will.
Yes.
And will the restrooms be heated? And flushable toilets?
Yes, so we would have the city sewer, yes.
And this golf course is hugely popular, so I'm glad to hear that. I think it's a great plan for it. Who will bear the responsibility of opening and closing restrooms? Open them up and lock them down.
I think our boys in blue do that for us.
I thought that would be the case.
We have a
That's
mix,
important.
yeah, a mix of staff depending on the season and the park. Yep, so a lot of times it's the officers, sometimes it's parks, sometimes it's marina, if they're on the marina park. So this park probably more so the officers and sometimes with the parks.
Will there be escape rentals? Or is it bring their own basically? And got that far?
I don't think we've gotten
Yeah,
that far.
quite that far.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Sandy?
Excuse me, Sandy Baker. I worked on that project probably, I don't know, when the skate park got going down below. Excuse me. And we were trying to figure out how to keep the pieces in place rather than taking them down every year and flooding the ice rink. And originally, we had a plan for a fairly large building, which obviously is not going to happen. But the primary objection was from Mick Hines, who had worked for the city forever and said, oh gosh, there's all kinds of stuff buried underneath there and you can't possibly do that. He eventually said, oh yes, we can. So that whole piece of property that they're now talking about to become a skate rink was eventually approved. And I just want you to know that because it was gone over years ago and sort of planned out, not to the extent that Rachel has come up with, but the idea of moving the ice skating up to Kiwanis Park, where it also has the sledding hill. So the whole winter project would be in one place.
Anyone else? Let's look at. Yeah. Okay. There's no further public comment. I'll make a motion that we exit the public comment.
Nancy Rondell,
Yes.
Jamie Melky.
Yes.
John Leo,
Yes.
Matt Bogera.
Yes.
And we can back to back and open the next one.
Yes, I'll make a motion to open the public comment on the skate park.
Yes.
John Leo, Matt Bogera,
Yeah.
Nancy Rondell, and Jamie Melky.
Yes.
Do we have any public comment on our skate park this evening? It's on my computer.
No.
I have something to say. I think it's a great idea. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Make a motion to close the public hearing on the skate park.
Second.
Jamie Melky.
Yes.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
Matt O'Gara. John Leo.
Yes. And thank you to Rachel for, well, to everybody involved, but Rachel for leading it up. Nice job.
So we have two resolutions that after council discussion, we have to motion to approve each of those resolutions.
I think they've done a great job and I like both of the projects. I think they're gonna be huge additions to the city.
Okay. It's all good, positive stuff for the city.
And just to clarify, Rachel, we have a year to work out the details. But the elements that are in the plan when it's submitted for the grants, they need to remain.
Correct, so you're attached to the scope item specifically.
Right.
Like, if we got 6 months in and we said, you know, we're taking out the ice rink, for instance, they would say, okay, but then we're taking out that funding you're asking for also
Right.
for the ice rink. So you're held to the scope items, but not the specifics of them.
So you need one for each.
Yep.
So I would make a motion to approve the resolution for Kiwanis Park.
I'll second that.
Matt O'Gara.
Yes.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
John Leo. Jamie Melky.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Motion to accept the resolution on the skate park.
I'll second it.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
John Leo. Matt O'Gara.
Yes.
Jamie Melky.
Yes.
Okay. Motion carried.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, council. Thanks, Parks Board. Right, next item is a presentation by Patrick Voland, who is the CEO and General Manager of the Michigan Public Power Agency. As council knows, we are members of the Michigan Public Power Agency, and they do a whole lot of things for us, but much of it revolves around purchasing energy to keep our electric department going and to keep our rates low. And Patrick is here, and he can introduce himself and what he does for the city, but this is to kind of give us an overview. Since it's been probably a while since you've heard from the MPPA, it's good to refresh yourselves for when we do approve these authorizations for purchase requests and other things related to MPPA, you have more context of why we're doing it and what we're doing.
Thanks, Victor. So I have a little presentation to review today, just to acclimate everybody to MPPA. It's been a few years since I've been up here, I think probably prior to COVID at least, which has now been a couple of years. So thanks for having me up. So I'm just going to run through sort of what is happening at the agency and then specifically at Harbor Springs. And if you have any questions, just interrupt me along the way. So obviously, you're a public power utility, and MPPA does not have any other types of members. So all of our 22 members are public power utilities, just like Harbor Springs. They're all very different, though. The demographics, the size, probably about 70% of our members have utility boards. 30% just have city councils. Some have heavy industry, some are more residential, like Harbor Springs. So very different, but they all have those three key facts: not-for-profit, community-owned, and locally controlled. And so, these are the kind of things that are the key principles for which the Joint Action Agency was founded. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why a Joint Action Agency, what our role is specifically for Harbor Springs and just public power in general. So back largely, well, actually in 1976, and then specifically we were incorporated in 1978, legislation was passed in Michigan. We call it enabling legislation, Act 448. And essentially what it did is it created a legal entity that could contract on behalf of another government entity. And this didn't just happen in Michigan, it happened across the entire United States. Largely in the 70s, there may have been some in the late 60s, but pretty much in the 70s, and then during a little bit in the 1980s, and then you've seen a smattering of joint action agencies formed after that. But there was something very obviously happening in the 1970s, and that is that the power prices were escalating at fairly astounding rates. There was actually an oil embargo, for all of you who are old enough to remember that. And there was a huge public policy push to invest in domestic energy supply. And the core concept of the Joint Action Agency then and today is really the same. They're very different organizations, though, from what it was back in the 70s. But there are two key principles that are exactly the same. One is economies of scale. So back then, and even still to this day, although there are some interesting twists, technologies playing here, but the bigger you made the power plant, the cheaper the cost of power. So not surprisingly, if you were a small utility and you wanted to compete with the bigger utility, you had to find a way to levelize the playing field. And the best way you could do that would be to aggregate with other public power utilities like yourself and build a power plant or invest in a power plant or invest in a contractual arrangement that was equivalent to what that larger utility would do. So that way you could get a price that was as competitive as they could produce electricity. But the other reason is diversification. And when you're a very small utility, you can't accumulate lots of different resources of supply. You can really only, because you have such a small amount of electricity to consume, only one power plant would serve your entire load, and anything more, there would be a lot of excess power. So to get diversification, again, you had to join together with other parties so you could take small amounts of a lot of different resources, which reduce the risk of power supply. Next slide. So just another recap visually about who MPPA is. Established 1978, 22 members. We're a project-based agency. I don't need to get in the weeds there, but I'll maybe talk about it at a high level. And then over here, you can see the little pictorial there of where all of our members are located. The two different colors there represent wholesale electricity markets. And what you can't see below there is that dark purple or blue that's showing up here in this screen. It's a different color there. Goes on in a giant swath of a geographic area that goes all the way to the mid-Atlantic United States, and that's called the PJM electric system. And then the aqua blue color here is the MISO electric system. So regional electric systems, they dispatch power plants through something called economic dispatch. And that happens by these regional operators in these two different markets. We have 4 members that are down in the electricity market there in the Southwest, and the remaining members are in the lower Michigan, although we do have one, Marquette, which is actually the largest city and largest municipality up in northern UP of Michigan. Next slide. So you all know one of the common things, you're all very old. The public power utilities have been around for a very long time, all established in the late 1800s, early 1900s, which is quite an amazing feat. They are under a lot of intense pressure now. We'll talk a little bit about that here toward the end. But this just gives you an idea about the size of our organization. So we're about 1.4 gigawatts. You put that in perspective. The peak load here in Harbor Springs is about 10 megawatts. So you're a small fraction of that total. But that's because of this kind of organization you are. That speaks to the benefits that the agency provides. We serve very, very small members and very, very large members and provide similar services to each of them. Next slide. So what exactly do we do for our members? Well, we interface wholesale power markets. So there's the day-to-day activities of our organization. These are people who are interfacing in electricity markets. They're scheduling power. They're offering power plants at prices into the marketplace. They are scheduling. They're doing load forecasts. So these are all the daily activities that we do on behalf of a small utility. If we weren't doing it for you, you'd have to do it yourself here. And that is just not economically feasible, generally speaking, given the systems and people you'd have to employ. Power supply portfolio management. Well, that's really sort of our core competency. That's all those different activities there, which is essentially how do we develop the different power supply resources that are going to serve all the loads of our members. And that's an ongoing process that not just happens for tomorrow. What resources are we going to use tomorrow? But it also goes with what resources do we plan to use 15, 20 years from today? That's a big issue. And then transaction investments. So we invest on behalf of our members. So we own resources ourselves. We also contract. We enter contractual arrangements. And because of the because of the production and federal tax credits that encourage renewables, there's two, production and investment tax credits. Because we're tax exempt entities, MPPA is as well as Harbor Springs, we have to contract with third parties who are taxable because they can harvest or monetize those tax credits. And then we get a lower PPA price. So we've recently, over the last 6 years, 450 megawatts, which is a very large number of solar and wind PPAs we've executed, and those are all 20-year agreements, so life of asset agreements. So just like owning, except for in this case, we're contracting. And again, we're doing that because of the federal tax structure. So this industry is under profound change. And I know I say that, and everybody in this audience that has their own living in their own industry probably can say that about wherever they work as well. But the electricity industry is, the things that are happening today are so significant that you can arguably compare them to the day the public power utility began. I mean, those early years of electricity industry, what's happening today is really equivalent to that. There's incredible transformation. It's really being driven by three things. Decarbonization, of course, is one of those. And I think most of you know what that means, but basically we're trying to reduce the amount of emissions that comes from making electricity. It's the simplest way of saying it. And it's not easy because this system has been running on fossil fuel since the beginning of time. And still to this day, it's the only on-demand source of electricity we have. Now there are other sources of supply that are becoming practical. We're getting energy storage. We actually just did our very first large-scale battery project, which is maybe 2.5 times the size of Harbor Springs, the city itself, so to give you an idea how big that is. But nonetheless, the reliability of the electricity system and the affordability of electricity system are challenges as we pace ourselves in this decarbonization. Decentralization is really about technology. It's how technology has made things smarter, faster, smaller. That's great, actually, for public power utilities. In my opinion, that's a good levelizer, except for if your customers want to do it instead of you. And then that requires you to have all sorts of systems to interface with your customers. And this is happening at different paces in different parts of the country, and it's happening at different paces depending on the customer class. So if you're a public power utility that serves a lot of sophisticated, large industrial loads, they're experiencing this in a big way right now. Utilities that have mostly residential load are experiencing it less, though even little things like your Nest thermostat is a decentralized technology. It's doing things that you're not telling it to do, it's doing it on its own. And then consumerization is really the third venue there, and it's really kind of a combination of decentralization, decarbonization. It's customers taking more control over their decision-making regarding power supply. I mean, I've not been in this industry a super long time, but long enough where I'm at sort of toward the end of my career. And I can tell you way back in the mid-90s, when I sort of started in the power business, the thought was that the executive, these end users are they have an insatiable appetite for electricity. They're inelastic. But today, because of decarbonization, decentralization, you see a lot of customers really, and large ones specifically, taking matters into their own hands, executing their own contracts. And part of this is driven by the fact that our entire transportation industry is also trying to decarbonize at the same time. That's a profound and very challenging thing as well. And so when you see a lot of those large users right in the middle of that, they are the ones that are driving these types of decisions. Next slide. So we've had to transform our business operation really to stay alive, relevant, and valuable in this new industry. And so that's required getting new staff. So I've really remodeled our staffing at the agency. Our power supply, I just mentioned all the wind and solar, and now most recently, this battery storage transaction we executed. Our systems. It's a very complicated, we have power supply that's totally dependent on weather. Before it was dependent on, how much coal or natural gas we scheduled. Now it depends on how much the wind blows and the sun shines. And yes, that's still a part of our power supply portfolio, but it's significant enough that it has a major impact on how we manage and forecast. And then, of course, engagement, because there's so much change going on in our industry, we really do need to do what I'm doing today. Being here, talking to governing bodies to help them understand how important these changes are. So this is just a high-level pictorial of our electric system, our power supply, sorry. So back in 2005, and I don't know if Victor can scroll it up a little bit, but back in 2005, 80% of the energy that we provided our members was from coal. And then about 17% from gas and about 3% renewables. Today, that's about 20, mid-20s. Gas about 40%, about 21% renewables. And then the latter's a little bit from nuclear and then the rest buying from the energy market itself. What the future holds, you see that top piece there? It says resource opportunity. So 2030, where and how is that going to be 50% renewables by that time? Or is it going to be more natural gas and slightly more renewables? A lot of that's going to depend on some very complicated decisions that we're making along with all the other utilities. What I am proud of though is we've retired all our fossil fuel, not all of our fossil fuel, all of our coal debt was retired in 1821. We have a very small amount of debt associated with the natural gas project, 2 natural gas projects. I think, I'm not 100% sure, I haven't looked at this, but I think with the last wind project, and it was very difficult to build, MPPA was involved in, which was in the thumb of Michigan. And then, although I'm sure the bigger utilities will surpass this, but I believe we have the largest solar project operating in the state of Michigan, which is in Shiawassee County with 160 megawatts. So $1 billion of PPAs we've had executed over the last 10 years or so. So traditionally, historically, this was our role. Above here was MPPA, below there was member. All the distribution activities, metering, customer service, all of the activities that went on locally were the member. MPPA had nothing to do with that. It was a very divided type of an organizational model. Go to the next slide. The way I like to describe this today is we've become much more interconnected. Because of all of the technology and those forces I mentioned earlier, decarbonization, decentralization, and consumerization of electricity, we're finding ourselves requiring to get more information from members about what's going on in their systems. And quite frankly, for reasons that are beyond the scope of today's conversation, a lot of our members are, they have less staff than they had 10 years ago. They have lower systems than they had 10 years ago. Their metering is outdated. And so MPPA is finding ourselves in a role where we're really advocating to the governing bodies of our members to modernize their electricity systems so that we can really essentially together collaborate and compete and deliver the type of electric service that customers are demanding in the future. Next slide. So this is actually your power supply broken down into some pretty odd colors that somebody in my staff created, so sorry about that. But these are stacked bar charts. They depict the sources of forecast energy supply by future calendar year. So you really have 3 different types of resources: their own resources, power purchase agreements, and market transactions.
I didn't quite catch that. Could you please say that again?
So own resources historically were fossil fuel. So back in 1978, in the early 1980s, MPPA invested in 2 coal plants. And guess who we invested with? We invested with Consumers Energy in Detroit Edison, one on one side of the state, one on the other. Well, both of those plants, who by the way are the youngest coal plants in the state, which tells you how old coal plants are, they're both coming to the end of their life. One actually is going to retire in 2025. The other is being repowered, or is being spoken about being repowered. It's actually the subject of a case at the Michigan Public Service Commission. And that would happen in the 25 and 26 years. So it'd become a natural gas plant after that. So why do I mention that? Well, I don't expect anyone here to dive into all the details, but happy if you want to. But this just depicts where your power supply is coming from. And Harbor Springs has been a member of NPPA a long time and has participated in some of these projects. And so it has old resources, but also new. So as we've participated in new projects and new resources, you have participated in those. But that cranberry or rust color or whatever color that happens to be showing up in either of these two different audiovisual systems, that's the amount of energy that's open in your power supply portfolio that we need to fill. So we have a program. It's not based on my own personal ideas about where I think energy prices are going to go or any of the staff that work at NPPA. We have a very programmatic, disciplined risk management process and a plan that you follow. And so when we send you notices that say, hey, we're requesting your authorization to execute future power supply, we do that to ensure that there's a certain amount of price certainty in your wholesale power cost. And that's so that you can manage rates for your members, your customers, sorry. You don't want your customers' electricity costs to go on all over the place when prices are high, drop really down when they're low. You want stability of pricing. And that's our job to do that for you. Next slide. So this graph sort of depicts what we call our stability hedge plan. And the recommended purchases are there in that yellow color. So the blue is what is already in place. Your needs are the total of those two. And so you're seeing that we're recommending, sorry, that's exactly right. The targeted amount that we request in each forward delivery year, which is the amount of your power supply that we want to have a fixed price attached to it. These yellow portions of the bar chart are our recommended volumes that we're requesting that Harbor Springs take to their governing body and get approval so that we can go out and execute those. And we don't just do it for Harbor Springs, by itself. That wouldn't make any sense. First of all, your power supply needs are small enough that it would be difficult for us to enter into a transaction for that. So what we do is we do that for all of our members on a continual basis. We're aggregating and pulling those resources together and then going into the marketplace on behalf all at once. So you get your piece, but the rest is allocated to the other members. Next slide. So this is a concept that we don't have to linger on too long, but capacity versus energy, they're two different things. But think of it this way, capacity is the ability, the demonstrated ability to produce electricity, and it's a measure of reliability. So all electric systems have at least as much generation as their forecasted peak load, plus a reserve amount. Why do you have a reserve amount? Well, because generators don't always work. Things trip offline, transmission lines go down, storms come through. So you have to actually have more electric generation on the system than you have forecasted peak load. Otherwise, your system won't be reliable. And there's all sorts of math and targets that we use in our electricity business to define the amount of reserves that we have. But suffice to say, there was a law passed actually at the end of 2016 called Public Act 341. And it requires all utilities in the state to demonstrate 4 years forward that they have enough capacity in their electricity supply portfolio that they can serve their forecasted peak plus reserves 4 years into the future. So that's our job on behalf of all our members to file a plan every February with the Michigan Public Service Commission that shows how we're going to do that. And that's a reliability requirement. So this graph just depicts that what your peak electric load is expected to be. Where the resources are that we have to serve that peak electric load. So I mentioned earlier that we used to just be a power supply agency and that was it. And we were wholesale and you were retail and we didn't really talk and it was a simple business. And now it's not simple and very complicated. And as a result of that, we're getting a lot more involved and how our members operate. And we're doing that for some really obvious reasons. One is we need you to be a financially strong utility, and you need us to be a financially strong joint action agency, because that's how we successfully transact in this business. We also need you to be competitive. If you're not competitive, likely over time, you won't exist. You know, a co-op will buy your utility or an investor-owned utility. You have to be competitive. You have to provide great service to your customers for the same reason. And because there's so many activities happening in this business today, and the technology is happening and changing so quickly, we also need to make sure that you're managing your risks and we're managing your risks, our risks that we can manage on your behalf. So we prepare reports annually. One is a creditworthiness report that measures your creditworthiness against S&P and Moody's financial metrics. And then we also measure your competitiveness and your preparedness for known industry risks. So known industry risks are preparing for distributed energy resources. Do you have the right kind of interconnection policy? Do you have AMI metering in place? I'm not sure where that's at. I need to poke the stick there, Victor. But we put together a nice glossy one pager that shows you where your risks are on a little fancy gauge. And we're supposed to nudge and talk to your utility director or city manager, what have you, and your governing body about making sure that you move along to address those risk factors. So I'm going to wrap up here now, and I'll take any questions you have. But sort of key takeaways is that the electric utility industry is becoming increasingly sophisticated and competitive. Decarbonization, decentralization are absolutely real. All you have to do is look at the amount of investments in some large end users are making and other large utilities are making. The transition is difficult and it's complicated, and there's a lot of strong feelings about it. It's a very emotional topic. I speak at conferences all the time. I'm involved in all sorts of meetings with various different industry groups, and it's like, the Hatfield McCoys and the Republicans and Democrats. There's just doesn't seem to be a lot of love in the room. There's a lot of people that think we should be decarbonized tomorrow morning, and others who think it'll take 75 years. So how do you find that happy reliability and affordability is really tough. MPPA and MMEA, which we didn't talk about, but they're like a state association that advocates on your behalf politically to make sure the laws and policies that the state crafts are friendly to public power utilities. We're your partner. You are a support of us. We're supporting you. And smaller utilities like Harbor Springs need these organizations more than any other. We are going to continue to change. I expect systems and staff at MPPA to continue to evolve to make sure, again, that we're staying on top of the type of skill sets and capabilities that we need to be able to provide the services that you're going to need to provide to your customers, both now and in the future. So with that, I know I ran through those slides pretty quickly, but I saw your agenda and it looks pretty thick. So I'll stop now and answer, pontificate on thoughts.
The decentralization, I mean, there's a whole industry that's pushing cities and individuals to add solar.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a significant percentage today? And what do you see that happening in the future? It's a big push.
Yeah. So we've done ourselves at the utility scale level, we've done significant investments in solar, and I suspect we'll continue to do more. And at the local level, something you would maybe call community solar projects, behind the meter projects, local projects here, they can happen and they have their place. There are some challenges, obviously, just like any resource. Every resource has pros and cons. The most obvious one is that it only generates electricity when the sun's out, and it's highly variable. Like even we now have experience. Like we're watching our systems hourly, every 5 minutes. We know exactly what they produce at all times. Even when a cloud cover goes over, the amount of electricity production drops off substantially. There's still electricity being produced, but it varies significantly. So we have to have other resources that can supplement that at all times. It has to be ready to go. Boom. It's instantaneous. And I think that's some of the challenges you're talking about there are, we still have to have what we call on-demand power, power that can generate electricity at the second's notice to ensure that it's supplementing for the variable resources. You know, the other thing is really space. One of the challenges with wind and solar is they take up large geographies. Solar takes up a lot less than wind, but still takes up a lot. So, you know, for probably the best way to describe it. So to serve your peak load, you need 10 acres a megawatt, and I think what your peak load is 9 megawatts.
Yeah.
Okay. So think of that. You'd need 90 acres of space to serve your peak load, and that's just your peak load, not your energy requirements, which vary all the time. So the other thing is, and it's very seasonally driven. So in the wintertime, it doesn't produce nearly as much electricity as in the summer, obviously. So you need some other type of resource there. But community solar can have its place, absolutely. You know, for some of the smaller cities, it's tough. And I don't know all the geography of your utility, but I'm guessing that the property here is pretty valuable. So, you know, putting a solar project up that takes 10, 15 acres, that probably is a pretty expensive decision. So it's probably better to find a piece of property that's not highly sought after as it might be in Harbor Springs. So that's probably one of the bigger challenges there.
Thank you. And then just when you said that as a requirement that 4 years out, you be able to prove reliability plus
The reserve.
a reserve, is that reserve a percentage of?
Yes, so they solve for this thing called a loss of load expectation, LOLE, and it's the electric system has derived this 1 day and 10-year reliability requirements. So basically, they solve the equation to say that there should only be 1 day and a 10-year time horizon where the probability of not having enough power is. So that's the statistic you solve to. So anyway, it turns out to be about 15%-ish.
Okay.
It varies, but about 15%. So that would be the amount of extra capacity you'd have on the system.
Thank you.
That's the other problem with solar is that, I don't want to complicate things, but forecasting what it's going to provide 4 years from now is hard.
Well, especially with changing climate. I mean, good luck.
Yep, well, that's, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sure. You're up to it.
Ask away. Or send me an email after or send it to Victor and I'll respond to that. But, you know, I think the last thing I'll just say here before I get booted off stage, you know, we really do want our members to be engaged in this business. It's a very complicated industry. It's going through tumultuous change, and engagement is the single most important thing I can advocate. Because we want our members to be healthy, professional, modern utilities. And sometimes with smaller members, it's more difficult because resources are smaller, people or staff is smaller. So if there's anything we can do there, you know, coming out to even a meeting like today is really an important aspect of my job and the job. And I'm not the only one that does it. We have like great people at MPPA that speak in front of our members all the time, and trying to get up here a couple times a year, trying to support you and your distribution investments. That's very important to us and long-term important to citizens here in this town. So,
Patrick, I have one question. Maybe you can explain to council is
Sure.
Because Harbor Springs, we're a little unique in the sense that we're a resort community. So our peak is a lot different at summertime compared to other communities. So how does that affect the equation? How does it make it more difficult for us to get this balance of capacity?
Yeah, well, that's another thing that's changing in the electricity business. So it used to be that we operated electricity systems to the peak of the summer. That's not how it works anymore. Now it's all hours of the year reliability is measured. And the reason for that is because as we add more and more of these wind and solar resources, it changes the profile of the electricity production, and it changes, if it's behind the meter, it changes the profile of the load. Fuel supply also in certain parts of the country have become a bigger deal, and you've read about some of the problems that happened in Texas a couple of years ago now. So we have a seasonal process that we go through. So for somebody like Harbor Springs, who has a very seasonal shape to its electric consumption, the seasonal model actually would be very helpful to you because we can be more prescriptive. Before, we had to have as much capacity as you would use in that hottest day of the summer all year long. So obviously in the dead of winter, when a lot of these people are elsewhere, you have a lot of extra capacity on the system. So the seasonal model will help, but we try to share those resources with other members as well. So when you're not using it, you have utilization elsewhere. And it also depends, again, it drives the kind of investment decision we make. Because we know we can only get a certain amount of accredited capacity or counted on capacity from certain resources. So for those particular times of the year where this particular city peaks at a high level, the composition of supply we use for that period of time is different than what we would use for some of the other members. And that's really what the portfolio benefits. By working together with other utilities provides a lot of efficiencies than doing it all alone.
Last question, what's AMI metering?
Yeah, so so the old solid state meter was one where, you'd see the guy walk by and, write down the meter read. And today, just like the wonders of our mobile phones, well, the same technology exists inside the meter now. So the meter does everything for you. It communicates exactly what the electric production is. Technically speaking, every minute of the day, it sends its own alerts. So the second your power goes out, it notifies you, notifies the utility. They don't have to send a crew out there. No longer meter reader requirements. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's also an incredible amount of data that comes with that. So you can create new rates for customers, seasonal rates for summer home users. You can find that people are using excessive amounts of electricity, doing other things in their homes. There's all sorts of really clever things you can do with advanced metering. But basically, it's just the gateway to a sophisticated data gathering system, essentially.
That's what I figured.
And that is on our capital improvements plan for 2027 and 2028. And we actually have joined with several other.
You're part of that group.
Yeah, we're part of the group under the MMEA, and we applied for a grant to receive federal funding for that project, because it would be about a $1.5 million project to
Big
convert
project.
our meters, so.
So some new meters and the labor to go out and replace it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Anyone from the public?
Anyone from the public? Good chance.
I always get questions. Not tonight.
That's it.
Where do you live?
That's undisclosed.
All right, well, Patrick, appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. M119 tree planting concept plan. So as you know, we removed the pine trees along Bay Bluffs and Skate Park in the M119 right away, the city's right away there. And part of the plan, the money we had $50,000 for that project. Part of it included replanting trees along in the right of way. So the tree board created a conceptual tree planting plan that includes species and where trees will be planted, how far they'll be spaced. And Dan Mulder actually put this conceptual plan together, and I'll show it to you quickly, but just to let you know that the chosen species, after we had, I think, 3 or 4 meetings about this at the tree board, but the Tupelo, arborvitae, and a flowering crabapple. We plan to plant the trees in front of Bay Bluffs in the spring, depending on availability of the trees, and wait until after the skate park reconstruction to plant those ones in front of the skate park and the pickleball courts. We reached out to Bay Bluffs. Their staff is supportive of the planting plan. They did ask about still making some space available to view their sign, so that we don't cover up their sign block their sign, I should say. As mentioned, we have about $10,000 from budgeted funds and about 5 remaining tree donations, which we have to plant, and that could cover probably about half of the tree plantings. We would also do a fundraising effort or tree donation effort for the second half or the second phase, which would be the trees in front of the skate park and the pickleball court. We will also seek out grants if they are suitable. We've partnered with Relief twice before, but they said they want to stay away from linear row plantings of trees. They did it once for us at the spillway, but they prefer to see what we did last year, which was more of trees spread out in areas. So I'm not sure that they would partner with us on this one again, but we'll still look for some of those grant opportunities. And those trees will likely be short enough to not interfere with the power lines. But you always don't know how a tree is going to grow in different conditions. Sometimes conditions aren't suitable and they don't grow at all. Sometimes they thrive and they grow larger than expected. So we will, our arborist, Ben Vealing, will be talking with Lucas, our DPW director, on making sure, ensuring that these trees don't get out of control, which we don't think they will. These trees are suitable, but you just never know. So we want to properly prune them and trim them so they don't get to the point where they do interfere with our infrastructure. The plan, and Dana, thank you for putting this together. This was a lot of work. The tree board did review this on, well, they reviewed it just last Friday. And let me zoom out so you can see a little bit. But essentially, on the top here, you have the tree species in the top left, and we have groups of planting of trees along Main Street. The way we presented this was groups of arborvitae, groups of flowering crabapple, and then groups of tupelo. The tree board did discuss that maybe there was probably maybe a few too many trees. We have about 51 shown here, so they were thinking about maybe reducing some of the groupings of 5 crab apples to 3, so we can bring that down number to more like 45, 46. And if we're going to phase it in anyway, you might get a chance to see what it looks like. So we might not do all the trees at once, but what we really want to do is order the trees, or at least for this Bay Bluff section, in the spring, so we can get them here planted. And I'm not sure exactly how we are going to plant them, whether or not DPW can do the plantings, or if we're going to do a community plant, or if we're just going to hire someone to plant them. All 3 options have worked. We've done all 3 options in the past before, and it all depends on workload and what we do. But I think we'll talk about that more at the tree board level, but that it affects cost. The initial buy for a tree could be anywhere between, $200 to $350, depending on where we get it from. But if you have DPW, yes, you're not paying that money for someone else to do it, but then you're taking DPW's time from other stuff. So it all depends on their workload. A community build was great. I know those of you that joined us here, it was great for the people. And, it took, 3-4 hours. We got in, 20 trees. I don't remember, something like that. So it can be fun as long as the weather's not too cold. But that's our plan. It's the conceptual. I don't, we might not follow this exactly to the T. We might take out, like I said, a couple of trees here and there, and spacing will be in accordance with our guidelines to make sure that there's enough room for the trees to grow. But the general idea is to have those species in those general locations and those general groupings with, some probably tweaks here and there. Probably the total cost for the trees going in is probably going to be around $20,000. $10,000 we already have from our project, and some already probably another $2,000 from donated trees. And then we would probably do a fundraising effort, a donated tree effort for the rest. So any questions about it?
Is there going to be irrigation involved in?
There is irrigation.
Currently is irrigation?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
There was a question about possible interference with any future plans for the bike path.
Yeah, so the bike path, right now, we're currently waiting a word from the county about an easement that we would like to see that comes in between. We would like to see the bike path come in between Bay Bluffs and the skate park along the west side of Bay Bluffs and come out here. So it wouldn't actually, the bike path, the proposal we have wouldn't actually right now go in front of Bay Bluffs. It would go in this way. But any trees that we plant here would be a space enough away from the bike path, so the bike path can be wide enough.
It'll look better than it does right now.
Comments from the public? Okay.
Rick Tarczynski, 465 State Street. I'd like to thank the tree board for all the work they're doing on all this. I was very happy to see them drop the flowering pear, which was one of the original ones. Since how many cities and states have banned it as it's a non-native tree and it has no benefit for native wildlife. But I am concerned with the tupelo and what kind of die-off rate we might have with that, since how the natural range for that tree only runs up through mid-Michigan or Grand Rapids area, and it doesn't grow up this high naturally. And my other concern is with the flowering crab, which is a great native plant. Cedar waxwings love it, robins love it. A lot of other native animals like it, but also deer love it. I've got 2 neighbors that have them, and all winter long, the front yards are trampled by the deer eating those little crab apples, and I'm concerned about deer crossings around M119 if it stays there. That's a lot of traffic to be mixing with a lot of deer. Thank you.
I have a question for the tree bomb, 501 Pepper Street. Will the deer eat the arborvitae, or will we be spraying them for eternity?
There is no tree in Harbor Springs that is totally deer-proof. We have not seen, there's some arborvitaes there right now, like big old ones that have not been browsed at all. So it's possible they just haven't found that area yet, but we'll take measures if we have to. Yeah, good question.
David Green, I like the plan. Is there a plan to irrigate the trees?
There's irrigation there already.
Okay, great.
We'll probably also use gator bags around each one, keep those filled. Just so get some extra water in for sprinklers.
And part of the issue is we are limited with the species we have to work with because we're trying to avoid species that grow tall enough to interfere with the electric line. So a lot of species were not available for consideration. That was one limiting factor.
And trees that are tolerant of salt spray, that's a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
We have someone,
I'm just Kathy Monchel, Sergeant Street. Just, was this for this spring we're gonna plant, or is it gonna be a whole year?
the goal is to get this spring before the summer. That's the goal.
Okay.
Would you like to donate a tree?
Sure. Or
no.
I could dig.
You have someone on the line. iPhone, your hand is raised. Please state your name and unmute yourself. iPhone, your hand is raised. If you would like to unmute yourself to speak, this is your chance.
Victor,
Yes, I can hear you now.
Pam Tarczynski, 465 State Street. White pine are native to northern Michigan and wildlife don't eat them.
They also can grow to 80 feet high.
Yes.
So
How many years does it take to achieve that height?
20, I don't know. They're very fast growing. And those were some of the trees that were taken down. They're shallow rooted and can blow out in a storm. And the wires that run past there, Victor, they're like primary service, I think they're called. So that's what serves most of Harbor Springs and also serves Bay Bluffs. So just have to be extra careful on that.
They also express the character and feeling of Harbor Springs.
They do, but we don't want them taking out our power lines.
Maybe maybe in the time that they would grow that tall, we'd be able to put those lines underground.
So I don't know what the future holds. We could put those underground pad in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. We just don't know. So I don't know if it's wise to make that decision at the council level to plant trees if we don't know what's going to happen there. But it is something that we've thought about.
Okay, thank you.
What do you need from me?
All right, just a general go ahead if there's, with the plan.
A lot of thought went into it.
Yeah.
There might be some future tweaks, but I think the right people are making the decision.
So my consensus, I think you can go ahead
This spring.
this spring.
Yeah.
Next week.
All right, our next discussion item is rerouting M119 discussion, and I presented a pretty lengthy memo in the council packet. I'm not going to go over it in detail. I hope you read it, but I'm going to summarize it. And to emphasize, MDOT had brought up the possibility of rerouting M119 to Lake Street to Lucas and I in a conversation as they were updating us about their construction projects for the fix there on Harrison Street and M119. And in that conversation, they asked, what does the city think? And I said, we need to go ask council. So council, I went to you about a month ago or so, and you directed us to just get some more general information. We went to the planning commission, the DDA had a public input meeting, and then staff had a couple meetings where department heads review this and analyze it. We also got input from our engineer as well. So, and our legal representation here, Jim Raymer. So we did a kind of pretty extensive amount of review in a small amount of time. We didn't do any thorough studies, but we did some opinion gathering and brief analysis, and we put together what we think is our best opinion in the circumstances. So first I'll go over the DDA opinion. They were generally in favor of keeping M119 on Main Street. They did express some potential positives for taking over control of M119, but they really weren't sure if it was worth the risk of diverting traffic away from downtown. They did not feel the benefits would outweigh those risks. So that was the general idea at the DDA board. The planning commission was hesitant to support the proposal, but they did believe it would be beneficial to have more facts and studies, especially this related to traffic, economic impacts, and bluff stability. There was concerns about increasing the speed limit on Lake Street, widening Lake Street, and how this could affect land use and zoning. Ultimately, the planning commission motioned to recommend that council request the state to conduct a traffic study for the potential routes with city input in creating the specs for that work, that scope of study. Then I did email the school superintendent to ask the school board members, and they just basically had some questions that you see here. Of course, mostly how it would affect the school district and how that would impact traffic and speed on Lake Street. We did have a public meeting here at City Hall on March 9th. We had, I don't know, several dozen people in attendance in person and on Zoom. The most common concerns were about increased traffic on Lake Street. People were expressing how Lake Street is more residential and walkable, so concerns about that. They also said people purchased property on Lake Street knowing it was not a highway, and they wouldn't like to see that a highway in their front yard or backyard there. They had questions about whether the state would expand the road, some questions about bluff washout and whether or not trucks could be rerouted off of M119. Some people did mention this traffic study should be needed, and some people did mention rerouting it outside of town. The public survey that we did, that lasted for at least 2 weeks. We did have 386 responses. 152 of those respondents checked that they were City of Harbor Springs residents. We didn't distinguish between voters or non-voters, but about 152 said that. That is probably about a representation of less than 5% of Harbor Springs. So it's a good sample for many of our past surveys, but it's not, necessarily a complete representative sample. But in general, Harbor Springs respondents had the same opinions as the overall group. There wasn't really much difference in their responses. For example, 72% were against rerouting M119 to Lake Street. And then overall group, it was 71%. So there really wasn't a big difference there. However, when the question came to rerouting M119 outside of town, 25% of residents were unsure about that. 57% were against it, but 25% were unsure. So there seemed to be a lot more people open to rerouting M119 out of town as opposed to Lake Street. Some in the comments, there was a lot of comments. Most common concerns were similar to the public meeting and expressed at the Planning Commission meeting and the DDA meeting about more traffic on Lake Street. Concerns about traffic interfering with children walking to school, and also cars coming out of other schools during busy time there. Financial responsibility and liability for the bluff. Potential for more traffic lights to be added to Lake Street. Again, concerns about road widening, and the sentiment that Main Street residents chose their homes knowing it was on a state highway. Lake Street residents didn't. Some benefits people expressed was, again, more control over Main Street could be a good thing, especially when it comes to speed in the crosswalks. There'd be less traffic on the bluff, but could potentially slow down or prevent destabilization of the bluff. Potentially less traffic on Main Street and more visibility for Lake Street businesses. So those were some of the proposed benefits. There were some areas of contention, or like there wasn't sure agreement. There was a lot of differences and questions here. Is in the city limits, is Lake Street route more or less residential than existing M119 route inside city limits? Yes, the CBD is located on Main Street, but there's a lot of residential areas along M119 on Main Street. Same thing with Lake Street. There's a lot of businesses. There's also a lot of residential. So there was different opinions there. One question that came up and different opinions about, is it more important to have control over Main Street or over Lake Street? That was a question. And again, what about removing it completely from town? That came up several times. And what is the state's reasoning for requesting this? I made the assumption, as I said earlier, and in previous meetings, that is because they don't want liability or responsibility for maintenance or future risks to that bluff. But I don't know, they didn't say that explicitly, but it came up in that conversation. So I assume that's why. So when we discussed this at staff, we weren't really sure that it would have a significant change in traffic patterns. Of course, we wouldn't know unless a study was done. But it seems like for most of the year, locals will continue using their preferred route, whatever route they use currently. You would see an increase in traffic in the summertime on Lake Street probably, because that's when we have most of the tourists coming here. It probably wouldn't interfere with the schools as much because the schools aren't operating in the summertime, maybe during a little bit during fall color tour, but even then, they're likely, the visitors are coming in on Friday afternoon, not in the morning. So not as much concern with traffic being rerouted there unless the speed limits are raised. If they do raise the speed limits on Lake Street significantly, then more people might choose to go the faster route. Because why would you go down a route if you want to cut through town, it's at 20 miles per hour versus one that's at 35 miles per hour. On the flip side, increasing the speed limit could increase more traffic, could increase more congestion, so people might evade or avoid that area. So we don't know unless there's a study. We're just not sure there. But our biggest concern does revolve around financial responsibility and legal liability for assuming control of the existing M119 route. M119 along the bluff has washed out several times inside the city limits, outside the city limits. It's been a continual problem for many decades. And we don't have to just worry, we wouldn't just be worried for taking up risk potential for the road itself, but for also potentially properties that might be affected below. If we're not maintaining our road, or we can't provide a for sure firewall fix there that would prevent washouts destroying properties or affecting properties below, we could be tied in some legal cases there with washouts. So we just don't know where that would go. MDOT is currently working on solutions that would address major rain events, once in a 100-year events, but, you know, with the rain events that are happening now, we can't predict, you know, they could, you know, 6 inches in an hour is, even if it only rains 5 or 6 inches that day, if it all comes in a short period of time, this fix probably won't handle that. So we got to be cognizant of that fact.
Just a quick clarification, when you say they're working on a fix, they're working on a fix for the section that washed out,
They're all,
not for the entirety of where we haven't seen an event.
Lucas, can you kind of clarify that, if you're there, about to what extent they're fixing? I think they're putting in a drain for a curbing system, right?
Yeah, what they're planning on doing is where the washout has occurred, placing a significant retaining wall, and then also extending the curb that ends at State Street on M119, extending that all the way to Ann Street, which would then collect most of the water in that area that has caused these issues in the past. But just that section from State to Ann, so there would still be the westerly section to the city limits that there could be some potential issues.
So and to Heifer.
Right, and Pfeffer, but you said drain, along with the curb, there's a drain
So I
system,
know, just a curb,
just a curb,
right, Lucas?
yeah.
They are going to add a couple of catch basins in that curb to get it underground, and then tie it into the existing system that does come down the West Hill.
Better than I thought, but it's still just partial, anyway. So
Yes, it's still partial, yeah. That is our big concern there. We would be, as staff, more comfortable with rerouting M119 out of town in that respect if we didn't have faced the financial responsibility for that, or the liability, or if there was even potentially a cost sharing agreement with the state on that one. However, taking over the road as is just to a disadvantage to the city at this point. We also have to consider that Main Street storm sewer infrastructure is at least twice as old compared to Lake Street storm sewer infrastructure. That means we'd be responsible for upgrading it sooner. Right now, MDOT would be responsible for upgrading that storm sewer. We'd be responsible for updating it sooner. So in the short time, it'd be a heavier financial burden on us. In the long term, it washes out because eventually we'd have to fix Lake Street storm sewer. But in the short term, it's a heavier responsibility. However, Main Street also has 2 surfaces, asphalt on top of concrete. So anytime we do work on that, it's that much more expensive to do any kind of work for our water mains or our sanitary sewer. So there's that to consider. Under our current cost sharing agreement with MDOT, the state is responsible for 75% of road resurfacing costs, given that Lake Street water mains are less than 4 years old. In the short term, again, the city would be bearing a heavier expense to update the water mains. So we feel that unless MDOT is willing to come to an agreement with the city on maintaining those storm sewer existing cost sharing, it would be hard to accept a short-term financial commitment. However, we probably need a deeper analysis to look at the long-term cost of taking over Lake Street, of giving up Lake Street or giving up something outside of town. For downtown visitors, again, this one is hard to determine how it affect businesses. Studies would need to be performed. We would need to look at different case studies of other communities that are similarly situated. There are communities where they've removed or relocated a state highway, and those communities, downtowns, were decimated. However, a lot of those communities weren't destination communities. Harbor Springs is a destination community. People are generally coming here with purpose. So we just don't know to what extent that number is. There certainly would be some sort of impact. We just don't know. We'd have to do a lot more in-depth studies there. And it's possible that if there is a traffic shift, the nature of downtown business could shift. And this was expressed a little bit on surveys and also in previous surveys, planning commission surveys, is about, on one hand, the downtown businesses say, well, and they're, to the great extent, they're right, that a lot of their business depends on that summer season. They rely on that traffic, that tourist traffic, and every last tourist, matters. On the other hand, we have people who are saying, well, it'd be great for the downtown businesses to cater to locals, and maybe having businesses that don't cater to tourists would mean there'd be businesses year round there that could cater to locals, and locals would start coming back more into town to do their shopping and look for other services. We don't know to the extent how that would, the opposing argument of that is there's just not enough people that live in this area to supply some of these businesses with year round business. So I don't know exactly how that would play out. We do a little more deeper study into that. A lot of this is, we don't know. Even if we could do a bunch of studies and we still could not know. You know, sometimes studies are only good as you know, how much you put into them. And even at that point, you never know how a particular community, how it will work out. I'm pretty confident that we wouldn't see a major loss of visitors or business in Harbor Springs, but we don't know how that would impact every single business, and we wouldn't know how Lake Street speed limits would change. We don't know how traffic would change there. But studies can be done to show, you know, can be done to help guide us. But I don't know. I don't know how reliable those studies will be.
There were two people, if I remember correctly, there were two people, the planning commission that had a lot of experience with the state and with rerouting.
Yep.
And they both felt over time that we would see a significant effect.
Yep. So my recommended, I put a few different options for recommended actions to reply. And this by recommended action is how we reply back, how the council replies back to MDOT. One is just to say, no, the city is not inclined to consider or accept this proposal, and just leave it at that. The other would be to say that the city is not interested in accepting the responsibility or liability, financial or otherwise, for the existing M119 west of State Street. The city is not interested in relocating M119 to Lake Street, but the city would be open to further investigating and rerouting M119 outside of city limits. Or option 3 is a standalone or addition, and this is kind of goes off what the planning commission had recommended. The city would like to see the state conduct a traffic study for existing potential and preferred M119 routes with city input involvement in creating scope of work. Of course, those are just options. I think as staff, options 1 and 2 are probably more preferred. Option 1 is the most preferred, but option 2 is also worth considering if we want to consider the potential for having M119 be relocated outside of town. Well, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you want to open it up first to any public comment, and then.
I do. Have any public comment tonight on 19? Talk, go ahead, Rick.
Rick Tarczynski, 465 State. Victor, in the discussions at the planning commission, and now you've mentioned that Main Street is concrete with asphalt on top of it, because that's what the state roads have to be. Would they have to redo all of Lake Street then to that type of surface?
Well, no, I'm not sure that's the way state roads have to be. It's just the way this road is, Main Street is right now. So I don't think they would do that, but I'm not sure. I don't know what MDOT would do on the road.
Okay, and also I walk Harrison and that whole area a couple times a day. And when it rains hard, there's a good inch of rain coming down Harrison, the whole street. There's never enough drainage on the side and the curbs. Could they not put a drain all the way across the road to catch that water coming down the street and funnel that into the storm sewer instead of it running down the road, hitting that curb and going over and needing some sort of retaining wall to stop it? Is that something that could be
I don't
done?
know that. I don't know if Lucas, you can talk more to that and MDOT's plans. Did you catch that, Lucas?
Yeah, I heard that. I know that they are adding a little bit different setup for the drains at Harrison and M119 to get it underground. As far as going all the way across, that it's not on the plans and they didn't decide to go that route. I do know that they had a couple dozens of engineers working on that project, so I'm sure they looked at pretty much every option that they had.
Because I seem to remember there are some streets in Grand Rapids, steep hills, and they do have drains that run across the whole width of the street, and that catches an amazing amount of water. Thank you.
I have 40 years experience in the heavy construction business, civil. And my experience with MDOT has been certainly less than pleasant. they will continue to do whatever they want to do, whether you like it or not. Option 3 opens the door for them to come in. Option 1 says, no, we're not going to do this. Then it's their move. If you use option 3 and you open the door and you allow them to do a study, you will have to live with the results. It's better to go no on their ground and wait for their response. And if it gets sticky, then you ask for the survey.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Fred Simons, 455 Arbor Street. My guess is that the relocating M119 out of town would be the least thing that MDOT would want to do, because there'll have to be some new road built, and it costs about $2.1, $2.2 million per mile to build a road.
What else?
Yeah, just quickly, I know some of you have been here for a very long time. And I know that you remember, say, 20 years ago, when our town depended on locals. Cassidy's closed down, Gamble's closed down. There were 2 more pharmacies in town, they're gone, because our town people cannot support stores that we have now. The taxes are high, and less people are coming into town and buying. It's not gonna happen. We're gonna have empty storefronts again.
Most of those storefronts are now real estate agencies.
Well, no.
Cassidy's is Kilwins and whatever.
No.
Anyone else? Anyone on the computer? I don't think she ever put her hand down.
Yeah, I don't think Pam. Pam, is that you raising your hand again, or you just didn't put your hand down in the first place?
Nope, sorry.
I tend to be more wanting to see some studies done to see what they would come up with myself. I hate to just say, no, we're not gonna do it, because in some ways, then the ball is back in their court completely. Because they can make it happen if they want to make it happen, they can do that. So to just refuse to engage with them, which is what I see that saying, no, we're not gonna do it, is that is usually my style. I don't really see the downside of some of the studies. I'm planning commission, so I heard that whole meeting too, and I think there's some expertise there that could maybe help to direct what we wanted them to look at in the studies. So I tend to think that would be a wiser way to go. And,
John, what do you think?
I kind of share Bob's concern. If we do ask them for any studies, we should make sure that we're not obligated to anything. And whether they state that explicitly or not at the beginning, I think we should, if we decide to go that route. There have been some really good meetings, some really good discussions, some really good ideas thrown out. The main issue that I see is the rationale behind this, because from a practical, let's reroute M119, I can't come up with a reason why the state wants to do it other than what you speculated, and that is responsibility for maintenance and liability for M119 on the West Bluff. The one study that I think we could benefit from is, Lucas alluded to all the work that, what did he say, 12 engineers, a bunch of engineers have done. That's the study I would like to see. I would like to see if there is really a concern or not. What have they studied about the bluff? What potential remediation have they looked at for the West Bluff that might be motivating them to do that? To me, the rerouting, and if there's an advantage to gaining control, of downtown without the liability. To me, that's a whole separate discussion to be considered in the future. My concern is about the West Bluff and the long-term liability to the city for the maintenance, which we don't really have the expertise or the manpower to do. And with changing weather patterns, any chance of trying to predict what's going to happen based on current remediation. And again, they're only dealing with the section, there's a whole remainder of the bluff that we don't even own, but if we have that responsibility for that road, we're on the hook.
And it's also, to add on top of that, MDOT is working on their part of the road, the culvert out on the east side of town, so they have to get an easement for us on that side. So there's clearly a lot of bluff side issues. And
Yeah,
we have two.
there's a message there. So engaging with them, trying to find out more, absolutely. Just saying no, again, I'm not just tossing the ball back and saying it's yours. I don't think they really want to do this. I don't want to risk it, so let's engage in a dialogue. But I want to see the study for the bluff before I see any other types of studies that we might do.
Well, I wonder if there's any room for negotiation about, once you see those studies of, okay, you know that this is a point that is probably gonna go. Are you willing to work with the city to fix that or something?
And that would be that path. Out of that, to me, out of that discussion and out of those studies will come maybe a better insight into why they even asked.
Right.
Out of that could come, sure, cost sharing, if it makes sense to the city.
Yeah.
Why not? But if we ask them to fix it, they have no reason to walk away unless there's something we don't know. So let's try to find out.
So there, if you go up the shore, I mean, there's probably 100 spots where they've tried to fix
That's right.
water problems.
There's nothing miraculous about that section up there.
Yeah.
So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, so I'd say no, but not a hard no, and try and get some information out of them. See what kind of surveys or studies they'd be interested.
Well, I don't think Lake Street's a good option. I
No.
mean, I'm not in favor of it going to Lake Street at all.
That's where we spend most of our time talking.
So,
Yes,
Yeah,
for
that
future,
doesn't make sense.
but if it makes sense to relocate it, let's deal with this one first. Because until we can deal with that liability, there's no reason to talk about rerunning.
So right now what I'm gathering is asking them why they want to do this, hear that from their mouth. And what studies they have that they've done here, if that is the reason that led them to that conclusion. And so a soft no in that sense, right? No, we're not inclined right now, but we want to know more. Want to know more about why you're asking this. Yeah.
And you've got reams of feedback.
And I know when I've talked with Attorney Jim Raymer, we've talked, and even MDOT emailed after they read the Harbor Light article that said, you know, they would want to enter into agreements with the city about this. So I don't, at this point, they're not, it wouldn't be as simple as them, you know, abandoning M119 to us. You know, it's one thing to take a road, it's another thing to abandon a road. And so that's where the things get a little convoluted. And I don't know, Jim, if you want to speak more to that, but that really is, it would be a lengthy process to come into agreements.
Yeah, I think the one thing you have to keep in mind is that MDOT could never indemnify the city over any liability. They are not able to do that. They cannot legally indemnify the city. So the city would be assuming liability and responsibility. And it could be substantial. And I believe the city clerk will speak to that as well.
Yeah, if there's a known problem that has not been addressed and we're aware of it, and it becomes our liability, the insurance companies are a lot more hesitant to say, oh, sure, we'll cover 2 lost homes at the bottom of the bluff. I think it's just a financial no-no that we want to stay away from. But I guess if we can have a discussion without any strings attached, that's a different story.
Well, if they reached out and said they would be interested in entering into, well, there's an opening to have further discussions.
There's some consensus there on how to approach that. All right. On to item 3F, Storm Park Playground, a citizen submission. How long to get through the survey? It was about 30 pages of survey results.
Our best attended survey.
I was just gonna say. It's one of the highest, yeah, yep. Absolutely. So to recap, the Zorn Park Beach Playground Plan, a citizen submission. In October, the Planning Commission approved the city's plan to reinstall the city beach's playground equipment at Zorn Park. Adjacent to the sand, we had removed that equipment in 2020 due to high waters. Reinstallation off the beach was necessary for a variety of reasons. A donor had donated the money to reinstall that same equipment, keeping it a very low cost project for the city. Our city's CIP plan does not include expenditures for new equipment or service at this playground. And obviously we have many other more high priority projects in place. So we're trying to make that as a low install, low cost install project. After several months of discussion, reviewed by staff, various boards, we had determined that its current proposed location in the northwest section of Lower Zorn Park, next to the sand, was the best location. The Planning Commission approved it on the condition that the city wouldn't reinstall it before May 1st in order to give residents an opportunity to present a different plan for the city staff to review. The group Advocates for Zorn Park has prepared a plan for new playground equipment on the eastern end of the park. It includes an ADA accessible service and at least some ADA compliant equipment, and it would be funded and installed by donors. I believe a representative or two are here to present that plan. And once they present that plan, the reason why it would come back to council is it would be, the cost of this project right now is estimated to be, if their proposed project is at about $90,000, that makes it a capital improvement plan, and council is responsible for accepting or budgeting for those and also accepting donations of that large scale. So, but the plan should be referred back to staff, as DPW is in charge according to city code with designing, maintaining, improving, and repairing all public property, including parks. And the Parks Director is charged with caring for and managing all city parks and playgrounds with assistance of the Parks Board. So I think the staff and the Parks Board should be delegated responsibility of reviewing these plans before council accepts the donation. So I do believe Tim or Patrick, one of you was here to make the presentation. Tim Patton, right?
Yes. Thank you all. Mr. Mayor, City Manager, Council, Tim Patton, 251 East Bay, been a resident here since 1988. Very glad to have the opportunity to be brief and concise with you. In the Zoom meetings I participated in last fall, as well as one in-person meeting I was here, I tried to lay out in my mind kind of a dream project for Harbor Springs, where similar to the Lyric Theater, where we didn't just all say maybe a theater, maybe not, but let's do a great theater, right? And it was all done with private funds and so forth. And so in the same way, trying to envision, rather than just move equipment on a beach to a place in the middle of the park and say that's the end of the day, why can't we take the opportunity to make this a great opportunity to have to be a destination, wonderful playground for the kids and so forth? As the father of 12 grandchildren, myself, and hoping for another 6 or 7 before it's all over. And they spent a lot of time there. So anyway, that was the vision, was to try to do something big and grand and not just relocate existing equipment. The good news is that privately, a group has raised $100,000 that could be put into a bank account at First Community tomorrow to fund it. So the funding is there. And then surprisingly for me, while we thought a petition might draw a couple of hundred signatures to endorse this plan, just yesterday it topped over 1,000 signatures of community participants and so forth. And to put that in perspective, as some of you may know, you can win an elected office in Harbor Springs with 500 votes. So 1,000 signatures is quite significant. And so I'm just here with being the ambassador of good news, that there's a plan, there's an expert here to handle any questions you may have about this tonight. But I wanted to be brief. There's a slide presentation that you have all had the privy to view in your packets beforehand. I will go through it very quickly so as to leave any discussion with the expert or whatever, but I'm just really thrilled to present to you a private sector plan to provide a really enhanced playground experience at Zorn Park that's fully funded privately. So a small subset of the 1,000 signatures, but people that care greatly about the community have come behind this proposal. And among the other things is the beauty of preserving the green space. The city's master plan over many years is concentrating on preserving the green space. I live on the other end of Bay Street on the east end, and there's a little bit of green space there. And then there's the park next to the pier. And then this is the only green space left. And I think a lot of us like to see it stay that way. So anyway, a lot of good people in town that are behind it. Next, please. This is a plan for all of our children, right? The surface it was designed, Doug, the expert can speak to, is designed so it's not just ADA compliant, but it's something that if some of us have special needs kids and they're in a wheelchair, that they can roll their wheelchair on the surface. It's not going to be on wood chips and so forth and so on. It's going to be on a very durable, wonderful, soft material. So it's for all of our kids, not just some of the kids. Next, please. As I alluded to before, trying to preserve the openness of the park and not to clutter it with, equipment right in the center of the park, blocking views. I have even heard there's some proposal, maybe have tables with umbrellas, and you can just imagine the change in the landscape. Now you drive down or bike down or walk down, and there's that beautiful view of the lake and the openness. And if we're not careful, we clutter that up and we've lost one of the few remaining open spaces in town. Next, please. Again, all new equipment. We're not going to reposition what's there that's had some aging and deterioration over the years. All new equipment privately funded. Next, please. Going to have a padded surface so that if there's someone falls off a swing set or has an accident, which my kids certainly have done, and that one of my grandchildren yesterday has a big Band-Aid where he split his head in his own park in his backyard. But anyway, a padded surface to minimize any injuries that might occur. Next slide, please. As we said before, all privately funded, 100% from donations that are all assured. We can put the money in the bank account tomorrow. And then from a public engagement standpoint, again, to my surprise, because I'm really just an ambassador for this project. This is not my thing in life. To imagine that there'd be 1,000 signatories in a matter of a couple of weeks supporting this alternative plan just blew my mind. I thought maybe 200, but it's 1,000 people that have been engaged and recommended to support this plan. Slide's a little bit dated. As of today, it's over 1,000. And then, the heartwarming, some of the comments that you get from individual participants who just didn't sign the petition, but they said, all kinds of positive things about this. They got engaged enough to say, this is something positive, this new proposal, please endorse it. That does it. pictures. So with that, we can move on to a Q&A if you'd like. Again, Doug's here as an expert in the design. I thank you for your consideration, but I'm just overwhelmingly positive about what's happened since last fall, that the public support is there and the financial support is there to really do something very special for the partners. So I'm not the expert. I'll sit down and any questions, Doug, if you stand up, they can address you. Thank you.
I'm Doug Smith with Ventura. I'm here to answer any technical questions you might have about the play equipment, either the past structure, the current design, the surfacing, any of those types of things.
What's your objection to being near the cannon? What's your objection to being near the cannon? Please.
What is my objection?
Yes, why are you so intent to keep things away from the cannon?
I'm not objecting to anything relative to the cannon. But my recommendation, I'm not trying to object, I'm just trying to be very positive on, can we maintain the openness of the green space? So I haven't commented on the cannon and I don't have an opinion about that.
But then mothers won't be able to watch their children at the water and at the playground. That's the whole purpose.
As I said,
That's the whole purpose of this design.
I have 12 grandchildren. And they go down there every day when they're in town. And my daughters watch them, my wife watches them, I watch them.
That's three people.
But again, I don't want to engage, that's your personal opinion.
Yeah.
And there's many other, there's
Trying to
many,
keep us positive and productive.
there's 100 factors involved. That's one of them. And I respect your opinion.
And yours.
Thank you.
Any questions for the expert on the turf or anything? I guess we had some concerns about keeping the grass clean or the artificial turf clean. Is it?
It's fairly simple to clean. If you have debris that gets lodged in a rake or a power broom, you can dislodge it. I know that there was question about goose droppings and they saw the picture in the slide. That's the easy way to clean it. If soap water, you don't use any harsh chemicals, you don't have to fertilize or anything like that.
Is there an issue with it's artificial turf, right?
Correct.
It's plastic. Is there a concern with it getting really hot in the summer when it's in the sun?
It does warm up, yes. I wouldn't say that it warms up hotter than poured in place rubber, which is another universally accessible material, which was the goal, I think, of the group. The surfacing types that were shown were all ADA compliant, but this is just the next level of accessibility standards. And it's, as far as park maintenance, it's probably the least costly over time.
I spent a number of years in the irrigation industry and they were actually expanding into irrigating artificial turf on sports fields.
Yeah.
Because it got so hot, it couldn't be played on in the summer.
We do irrigate them for dog parks. You need to wash some of that stuff away, yeah.
However you want.
I'm sorry.
It's all
The material that's underneath the grass that's supposed to protect children from falling, what's that made out of and what's the life expectancy of it?
So the padding underneath is a foam pad. It has, the turf itself has probably a 20 to 25-year life. And what our industry is telling us, the manufacturers, is that the pad will last double that. So you're looking at 2 generations, maybe a generation for the top, depending on use, replace the grass once, and you have 50 years or so of life.
Kyle's got a question.
well,
I don't want to direct to you. The difference between that and a rubberized material, what was the pros and cons between that? I've seen those down in like Mississippi as well.
Right.
So I'm just curious of when you did your.
Yeah, poured in place rubber is is another unitary surface. You can find it at Camp Petasiga, Bayfront Park, and Toski has a little bit of it too. It tends to expand and contract with the northern climates that we have, which causes cracking. It's a surface that needs maintenance of a top coat sealer. I would liken it to what you do to your asphalt driveway. You have to do it every 5 years or so. So there's more maintenance in that regard and more physical degradation maybe. And the other aspect of Port Place is that UV rays is a detriment to the binder that holds it all together, which is part of the reason why you gotta coat it. So, and turf doesn't have that. And we found in the northern climates that it holds up better to the frost and, you know, thaw cycles that we have.
I have you want to, no, that's okay, you want Kathy first, I mean, or do you care? I have a question for Mr. Patton, thank you. Is this a donation, a full package? The only way the money will be available is if this plan is done. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, largely, you're correct. In essence, I built houses, we've all done construction projects. There's things that come up that say, you know, maybe it should be 3 feet less this way or 2 feet moved this way. And certainly that's open as part of this, is just to come up with the right solution. But what's critical to it is the general positioning of it not being the general green
Okay,
space.
so the location is in your estimation, in order to have this money available for a playground in Zorn Park, basically, it needs to be where you're requesting it to be.
Yes.
Thank you.
With the idea that if there's always going to be constructive input, and if individuals or experts come and say, we recommend this tweak or that tweak, then there's certainly openness to that. But the general idea, the critical idea is the positioning is what we're talking about.
Thank you.
I just had a couple other questions. So you're just talking about this special, for where the special surface, where the actual equipment would be located.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, the equipment has a use zone that's required for safety. And so that turf basically encompasses that use zone. So that, imagine it being 6 feet wider than the equipment is on all sides.
Also, thank you.
Mhm.
What's the risk of this degrading? We're talking about plastic, microplastic, and we're right next to the lake. What are the issues as far as that, of this surface?
Like a leaching into the water table, is that what
Yes.
you're asking?
I mean, I'm not an expert in environmental stuff. I'm just knowing that plastics are an issue.
Mhm.
And I'm looking at this, seeing how close this is and wondering what the risks are of, I mean, there's already microplastics everywhere.
I guess I'm not qualified to speak to that, I'm sorry.
But thank you.
So, one final comment?
Sure.
So, the final, excuse me for my instability. The final suggestion is just that the group, the 1,000 signatories on the petition, would just encourage city council to please make their, as I understand from the rules, regulations, and the way governance works here, that city council needs to make a recommendation back to Parks and Recreation where the issue will be settled. So we'd like to not just have it die here. But if you would see among yourselves whether that's a private discussion or it's a public discussion, to make the recommendation that this proposal be forwarded with your imprimatur to Parks and Recreation.
And I'm a little confused because we've already had this before us a couple times, and we agreed that the placement of the playground and the decisions about the playgrounds was not council's to make.
Right.
I'm sorry, I got my back. It's okay. That it belongs with staff first. It starts with staff. And they, with the parks and staff, and if they feel it's necessary to bring it back to council, it comes back to council. So I'm just a little confused about why we're back here again, you know, talking about the playground. Because we've done this a couple times already.
Council has to accept or approve the donation before it can move forward, or the possibility of the donation.
But before you ever even get into that, the discussion about the playground, this donation has a location attached to it. I mean, that's a given. As well as style of playground. And I feel like we're overstepping staffs in the city code, the responsibility of staff for us to be weighing in on it at this point. I'm not talking about the money yet. I'm just talking about the design, where it's going to be. And this offer has an exact location within a few feet, as well as exact playground equipment. And I just feel like we're overstepping. This really belongs in staff's hands first. And then they are the ones that should bring it back to us. So I'm hesitant to make a lot of comments about it or about design and any of that.
Well,
And I
don't think
agree.
we're here to talk about the design right now. We're just here if we're interested in moving forward on this.
I'm interested in giving it back to staff. for
Right,
them
well,
to
that's
look
what I
at.
mean.
Is that what we're,
As far as
okay.
moving
I mean, I'm
forward.
excited that the group of residents have come together to raise the money to propose what might be a better solution.
Right.
The decision about whether it's a better solution and how to do it belongs in Parks and Rec.
And
So I think we're in agreement. Should get back to Parks and Rec and to staff to take a look at it, to look at the 3 feet this way, that way, what do we need to do? And if they feel it's appropriate to come back with a
Right.
proposal for final design that we could then accept and implement.
Yeah, because there are gonna be some changes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the sidewalk's gonna have to get moved around it, and there are some other
I think it had through a plan.
things
So-
that.
I think the plan, I think the plan does not require the sidewalks to be either added to or moved. Is that right?
Well, the surface is completely 100% universally accessible, so the sidewalk can butt into it and on each side, and you could pass through it. The question, I guess, is, I mean, for your discussion is, do you like that or not? That's not mine.
And that is exactly what belongs in Parks and Rec.
Exactly. That doesn't belong.
Yeah, that's not us.
Parks and Rec can come back with their recommendation as to a project that we could then approve and accept the funding for. Is there interest in, sure, let's find out.
Yeah, I think this is a, great opportunity for the town, get a really nice playground. I think to push it forward. And I don't know if we need to do a motion or just by consensus to have it progress.
Yeah, if that's, if you want a consensus, by consensus, pass it on to staff.
Yeah.
And Parks Board.
Where it belongs.
So,
Yeah.
And then, once staff reviews it and Parks Board reviews it, if there's a change in the location from what we originally went to or proposed for the plan, they'd have to go back to the planning commission for review because of a different location. So there'd be a process there, but this would require staff's review first and then discussion at Parks Board.
Let's move it forward.
Yeah. It's a great opportunity. Okay, thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, wrapping up here, we will go on to city manager's report. Coincidentally, Pat from the MPPA discussed about AMI metering project. And so I did kind of explain that, but we did have AMI metering planned for 2027 to 2028. And we got together with several different municipalities that are part of MMEA, which include Charlevoix and Petoskey and others, to implement AMI. To apply for that grant to allow us to implement AMI. It's a federal grant. I believe the grant could cover 50%. It might be able to cover more, but I think it's at least 50% of the cost of the project if we do get it awarded. So there was strength to applying together with multiple municipalities because it's a federal grant and they're looking for large consortiums of utilities. So I'm not sure exactly when we'll hear back. I think it was by the end of the year, but since we don't have this plan until 2027, 2028, there's no rush, but it could be a huge cost savings for electric ratepayers for that, so.
It's a requirement that we migrate towards.
No requirement.
The benefit is.
AMI? Oh, just keeping track of the data, keeping track of issues.
For the city.
For the city, oh yeah, absolutely. Meter
I
reading,
know why.
meter reading costs, I mean, it's pretty significant for us.
Just a side note on that, because I had a discussion with Lucas about this recently, and Huey maybe. The meters that we have now, we actually have to have tested, you know, we go through neighborhoods and test certain areas because they are dated and they're different technology. These are, they either work or they don't, and we would know immediately. Rather than having to go out and test to see if one's pulling wrong, or I don't know the technicalities, but over the time, 15, 20 grand a year in meter testing would be saved to a certain
And
extent.
it's not just the city, it's all utility customers.
Correct.
Yes, so everyone is the
So
right,
much larger group.
3,600 customers about is how many we have on our utility system. Interesting.
So,
But that, we applied for that, that was part of our CIP, so it made sense to go for any grants that, we go for the CIP, but of course, like with our DNR grants, accepting any award would have to come back to council. Rachel had mentioned in her parks plan that DNR has officially approved our city's master parks plan, so congrats to the Parks Board and Rachel for working on that. And as I said, City Hall will be closed, but we were closed today for staff training from 9 AM to 12 PM. We had a little customer service, sexual harassment, workplace diversity, bunch of different issues we went over in training. And I think it was well received, and we try to do trainings annually, so that was a good one. And then as far as meetings, we basically, the DDA Planning Commission, as you know, talked about MDOT's M119 request. The Planning Commission has also discussed the short-term rental or proposed ordinance, and they had some discussions on changes, some minor edits to that ordinance. So we'll be discussing that again at one of their upcoming meetings here in April. As you know, the Planning Commission has been diligently also working on zoning code updates. So they've been meeting twice a month. So it's a lot of work that they're putting into it. But there's a lot of issues to consider with the zoning code update, plus the short-term rentals, plus our regular land use site plan reviews. So they're going at it pretty strong. So thanks, Bill, for leading the group there. Noise Control Committee discussed some edits to the noise ordinance. We're still working through those, and maybe this spring we'll have a couple, we'll come back to the council with a couple meetings to discuss the results of those noise control committee meetings. I imagine one meeting in council would be to present the results and the studies and suggestions that the noise committee came up with. Then council takes some time and the public to digest those, and then come back for whether or not those should be approved. And then, of course, the tree board review the M119 conceptual plan and project matrix goals. As far as meetings that I had, my monthly meeting to Lansing for our MPPA Board of Commissioners meeting, and that's what you heard, Patrick. That's what I listened to, but for 3 hours once a month. So much more detail. That's what we do there. We actually had the public input meeting here on M119, and then on March 9th was the Chamber's State of the Community. It's attended by a lot of people. So that's what we have going on. Any questions?
Cheers. Kudos to Victor for a great class today. It was, I mean, we needed it, and he did a phenomenal job. I thought he was gonna hire somebody to do it, and he did it, and it was well put together, very educational.
Thanks.
Quick question.
Sure.
We have a ordinance or code or whatever that commercial landscapers and that have to quit. I don't know what it is, 7, 8 o'clock, something like that. Is there like anything that they have to start after a certain time in the morning?
So our ordinance does not distinguish between commercial landscapers and residential landscapers. It distinguishes between commercial construction companies and you working on your house personally for construction. So but for all of those, yes, there is a time you have to start. You can't start before, and a time you can you have to stop by.
Is commercial snow removal at 5 o'clock in the morning okay?
No. Well,
No, yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Commercial snow removal.
I mean,
On
for a
street.
whole.
I believe it is.
I think there's an exception.
There's an exception.
I think that snow removal is an exception.
So from the cities, yeah, so the commercial, yeah, well, I'd have to double check that, Fred, but there is for lawn maintenance.
Yeah.
There is Yeah, I think it's 7 or 8 AM, I think.
Someone having someone come in at 5 o'clock in the morning, clear their driveway whenever there's 2 inches of snow or more.
I believe it is acceptable, but I will check this all.
Yeah, the city, absolutely, the city can on that property, but I'm not sure about private individuals. Their homes. I'll double check that though.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. New or old business, yeah.
New or old business? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
It shouldn't matter what time it is.
I know, well, and I.